The last chapter of Act 2 of The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania, Glass Showdown, 3 days ago, sometime after Ed woke up from his stupor, although he had completed everything he could not do in the previous 10 days, but he regretted that he could not practice during those 10 days. He also thought, Glass Showdown must have started by now, but he regretted that he had not increased his magic engineering stat. Because for further training in magic engineering, he needed blueprints and materials. But he then immediately realized something. A way to increase his magic engineering stat significantly. The final stage of the Glass Showdown has 4 phases. Among them, the one with the highest difficulty is Phase 3, the Secret Laboratory. The boss of that stage, the Soul Library, Librarian Reina, is so powerful that without the Sword Saint ritual, she is difficult to defeat, but that is a problem for Taylor to solve. While Ed himself was interested in the contents of the Soul Library, that place contained all kinds of valuable magic engineering formulas. He remembered there were at least as many as 2 digits. There were even 2 formulas to make legendary grade magic engineering items. Ed knew it was risky, but if he was not alone there, he thought, it should be fine, right? At the Sylvania Academy, at that time during class, Professor Glast's voice was heard saying, Adele from Class B and Isla from Class C are expected to enter class the next semester. This academic year clearly has many talented individuals. Even if they move to a higher class midway, their studies will still not be interrupted, so he asked them not to worry. While listening carefully, Lortel then thought, there are many talented students. Class A so far has 3 people, and in the next semester it will reach 5 people, whereas before the school term that Professor Glast held, the A class didn't even exist. Isla's combat ability may not be much, but she is said to have great sensitivity to celestial magic. In the middle of her musings, Lortel was then surprised when she saw Zik suddenly stand up. Professor Glast also saw that. He then asked, what's wrong? Zik said he was hesitant to say this, but can they really determine the criteria for entering the A class purely by talent alone? There are some students whose potential may blossom in an unexpected way through their efforts. Hearing that, Professor Glast then questioned him back. So what does he mean that he underestimates and demeans their efforts, by ignoring and messing them up like that? Zix didn't seem to expect Professor Glast to suddenly say that. He then apologized. He didn't mean to think that. Professor Glast continued. Precisely the most powerful way to mess up someone's life is to accept their still vague talents and push them carelessly. Lortel could only sigh hearing that. Before entering Sylvania, a background check was conducted by the academy professor. His obsession with talent, which even made him seem stubborn and haughty, was probably because his daughter, Professor Glast's only child, Murray, was an ordinary magician. But he put too much hope in his only child. That's a very natural thing for a parent. But Murray thinks the hope is not from her parent, but the hope of Professor Glast, the professor of the Faculty of Magic. Because of her belief, she participated in the conquest of the demon race at an inappropriate time at her too young age. Then, she met her end. She heard that it was because of this that Professor Glast became obsessed with gifted people. Most of his teaching period at Sylvania Academy was focused on researching a puzzling magic known as celestial magic. But if his past is observed again, it becomes clear, what Professor Glast was after was not celestial magic, but the person who designed the celestial magic. A person who was considered the most talented in history, the great sage of Sylvania. Perhaps the reason he wanted Isla to enter Class A was because of his celestial magic research, amidst the struggle of her mind. Lortel was then surprised when she heard Professor Glast suddenly call her, but Professor Glast seemed a bit hesitant to convey what he wanted to tell her at the moment. This was a separate matter from the lesson, so he would call her tomorrow. Hearing that, Lortel then wondered, is this about the sage's scroll? The scroll is the main ingredient for celestial magic research, but unfortunately, whatever he said was useless. Soon she would get possession of the sage's scroll sensitivity formula. After studying for who knows how long, the class finally ended. The sage's scroll sensitivity formula would start soon. It was risky, but he was still confident of successfully completing the plan. The key to this operation was to follow Taylor's path through phases 1 to 4 to save Isla, and pick up the items left behind by him, especially in phase 3. He had to wipe out all the items related to magic engineering in the Soul Library. He had even made a list of items that must be brought, including Glock's Eye, having the effect of temporarily exploding the amount of magic power and proficiency of all sensitivity-related skills, and Delheim's Hourglass, having the effect of being able to restore all physical conditions to a few seconds ago. These items had extremely powerful effects, but due to the difficulty of farming materials, these items could only be crafted in the later stages of the story. Anyway, they would be useless to Taylor. So he was the one who would keep them, and at the same time, he would observe Taylor's performance in phase 4 and then return to the cabin. After that, all the plans were completed. The day when Sage's scroll sensitivity formula was used was during the Glass Showdown. He told Janica that something was lost in the underground sewers, so they would look for it together. He thought Janica hated dark and narrow places, but somehow she was more proactive. He guessed that maybe she was anxious about him, and it made him feel a little reluctant, but with a reliable partner by his side. The plan was perfect. When Ed was about to return to the cabin, he was then surprised when he saw Assistant Professor Claire coming towards him, and said that Professor Glass called him. Seeing her, Ed thought he heard from Janica that she visited the cabin recently. He wondered what was the reason for this. The Sage's scroll sensitivity formula happened tomorrow. Why should it be now when it was busy? Even so, Ed then said that he understood. He didn't reply to his letter earlier because he was tired, so he guessed it must be something important. And when he arrived at Professor Glass's office, he then met someone unexpected. It was Isla. Isla then immediately became alert when she saw him. She also asked why he was here. Ed was really speechless looking at her reaction. Wasn't her reaction excessive even though he hadn't done anything yet? Her bad relationship with Ed Roth Taylor had been going on for more than 10 months. Even after that, she was targeted by him with arrows. But regardless, Ed was confused. Isla, the person who would be kidnapped when the Glass Showdown started tomorrow, was even here. Then why was he called too? But he then immediately realized something. Ed then immediately rummaged through the documents on the table nearby. He seemed to be looking for something. Isla could only be shocked and confused at his sudden action. After searching for a while, he didn't find what he was looking for. Here there was nothing that could change the future to his knowledge, for things related to Ed Roth Taylor. Only this document. Looking at the document he found, Ed wondered, could this be the contents of the incident reported by Assistant Professor Claire who was watching him? If so, Professor Glass might have realized what he did in Ophilus Hall, but he was still confused. What did that have to do with the current situation? In the middle of his struggle of thoughts, Ed suddenly felt something. He then immediately took out his dagger while feeling alert. Isla screamed in panic when she saw him suddenly pull out a dagger. Shortly after that, there was a sudden movement from the entrance, and Professor Glass walked in. He didn't look to be in a good mood. Seeing him coming, Isla then frantically ran towards him. She asked him for help. She was very scared seeing Ed carrying a dagger, but instead of intending to save her, Professor Glass then cast a magic. It was celestial magic, time prison. Professor Glass then released the magic towards Isla. Isla froze completely when hit by the magic, as if the time in her body had frozen. Not stopping there, Professor Glass then directed it at Ed too, but Ed could react quickly. He threw his dagger, which he made using engineering magic, towards Professor Glass. When the dagger was close, Ed then called Mug, and the dagger suddenly lit up brightly. And a very powerful explosion was then triggered from the dagger, which devoured Professor Glass alive. But it wasn't enough to kill Professor Glass. Ed also realized that. Professor Glass then praised him for understanding the situation so quickly. His response was almost too smooth. Professor Glass then returned to casting his magic. He also asked him, did he check all his research materials in such a short time? But he felt that it was strange. He couldn't possibly know his intentions just by checking a few documents. Ed immediately hid behind the table when he saw Professor Glass come out unscathed. He also asked, "Is suppressing him really necessary? Doesn't he just need Isla's sensitivity to celestial magic? He doesn't need to suppress him anymore since he has already fulfilled his purpose." He also promised to keep his mouth shut. Hearing his question, Professor Glass replied, "He has a purpose, and this is for that purpose." So he asked him not to look too badly at this. Ed could only sigh hearing that. He lamented, "Could he at least explain it? This has gone too far." He even dodged with his unclear words and told him not to look too badly at this. But as he remembered Professor Glass telling him not to look too badly at this, he then thought of something. Indeed, even if he managed to get out of here, Professor Glass would not be silent. Most likely it would only further complicate the scenario. More than that, if he was kidnapped here, he would likely be locked up in a secret laboratory with Isla. This was as if he was providing a direct bus to Phase 3, realizing that, Ed was thinking, did he just let himself be kidnapped? Seeing Ed who came out of hiding, Professor Glass then asked, did he want to force a fight, or had he thought of some kind of plan? But when he saw Ed just staying still and not resisting, Professor Glass then praised his decision. It wouldn't be so bad for him. And he then froze Ed using time prison magic. Looking at Ed who had been frozen, Professor Glass then recalled his conversation with Claire. Claire at that time said, at first she doubted. But she was then surprised because he could excel academically while living in the wild, as if he lived for 48 hours a day. She couldn't even imagine how much blood and sweat he had to spend to achieve that. But Professor Glass didn't believe it at all when he heard her words. He also said that her words were different from the previous one. Before she was grumbling about Ed being some kind of mastermind or something. But now she was even amazed at him. Hearing his disbelief, Claire then showed him the crystal ball containing the recording magic, and said, she didn't expect that he could fight like this. When Professor Glass saw the recording, he also thought, judging from his fighting style seen from the crystal ball, Ed's fighting sense was extraordinary, but that's obviously a lowly way. The lowly way is to thoroughly observe the enemy and exert all kinds of means. It's the result of effort, not talent. That expression that didn't show the slightest sign of anxiety. It reminded him of something lost in the past, his daughter who swore to confirm her path and honor her father's name. That memory came back again. Professor Glass looked very depressed when suddenly remembering that, while Professor Glass was busy struggling with his thoughts, Mug who had been hiding, then slipped away from there silently. He flew very quickly to a place. That place was Ed's cabin. He headed there because he knew there was Janica. While tasting the dishes she made, Janica thought that Ed was a little late, but what she didn't know was, she would soon get bad news related to the person he was waiting for later. In the final days of writing his travelogue, he wrote, "The end of my magical exploration of the southern continent." As he explored the world, he realized there were still many truths about magic he didn't understand, which made him think the title of Grand Magician seemed inappropriate for him. His master, Sylvania, who passed away at a young age, remained in his memory as a beautiful woman. In hindsight, even those colorless days were actually very eventful. The sadness that eroded his heart the day he lost his master has now manifested into an old photograph over time. While for a person who lives a long time, sometimes, the memories of longing appear again, the regret of losing something sometimes numbs the mind, breaks the natural order and distorts the truth. Indeed, sometimes there are moments when the feeling of wanting to once again see the face of his master unexpectedly appears, but what has been lost no longer exists. The grieving person must strengthen himself, unfortunately, so. He told his granddaughter who witnessed the end of his life to strengthen herself. To her, which marks the end of his life, he dedicates the last sentence of this book. Lucy, Magic Travelogue in the Southern Continent, quote Glocked, Lucy was unable to stem her tears as she watched her grandfather die in front of her eyes. Back to the present, Lucy still missed her grandfather, more than anyone else. She knew Glocked himself recognized and took his death in stride. Therefore, she had no choice but to let him go. A question then arose. Will there come a day when all the pain of loss is healed and even the wounds disappear, something that helps temporarily forget? The longing is a bag of jerky in his pocket that satisfies. But she was disappointed when the bag turned out to be empty. She then looked down. There she saw Mug speeding towards Janica, who was cooking the dishes, and while Mug was whispering something to Janica, a very terrible aura then appeared around her. Lucy could only be confused and surprised when she saw that, in the Tricks Hall, the main conference room, the sage's scroll handover ceremony was taking place. The scholars were selling, while the merchants were buying the sage's scroll. Only the top figures from each party were gathered. Among them, the attention was focused on the chairman of each party. Among them, Lortel Ketchon, interim president of Elt Store, and Abel Facius, principal of Sylvania Academy. While looking at him, Lortel thought, the same age, the same impression of him, but far different from that person. The person she meant was Crefin Roth Taylor. After the negotiations for the purchase of the sage's scroll were completed, he came to see her, and he asked her to hand over the sage's scroll, and to hand over the sage's scroll to Crefin. She had planned to do that from the beginning, so it was nothing to worry about, but still, this could not justify the big lie she told to Princess Phenia. Lortel at that time set a price of 12,000 gold coins to him. Although she asked for a price that was quite expensive, he accepted the offer and would buy it immediately. He even gave her an information. With a smile, Crefin asked, did she know that Elt had hired a mercenary to head to Sylvania? He asked her to be careful, make sure everything was not problematic this time. He was an unfriendly man, but it didn't matter. The information related to Elt was valuable, and he managed to find a person who was willing to buy the scroll. The preparation was complete. At the sage's scroll handover ceremony, Professor Glast was the mediator there. He said, Abel Facius has relinquished his authority as the user of the scroll. He then invited Lortel to come forward to become the new user. Now she will have the transaction profit as well as the purchase certificate. No, rather, she will have full rights to Ed. A huge feeling of excitement rose from her heart when she thought about it, but when the ceremony seemed to be going smoothly, a magic circle suddenly appeared on the floor below them, and many giant golems then appeared from there. When they were blocking the golems, they were then surprised when they saw Professor Glast taking the scroll. With the sage's scroll in his hand, he then disappeared from there. Based on that, we know who the cause of all this is. Lortel could only be stunned when she saw it. She looked very unwilling to see her full rights over Ed had been stolen before her own eyes. Even though Ed Roth Taylor did not appear, the story continued without problems. The last chapter of Act 2. The Glast showdown battle began, in Professor Glast's secret laboratory. When Isla had just regained consciousness, she was then shocked and panicked when she saw Ed in front of her. She also asked why he was here. Hearing Isla, who kept shouting, Ed then told her to be quiet. He also thought, at this time, Glast should have taken the scroll. While looking out of the prison, Ed said, if she keeps shouting like that, the underground waterway monster in front of her will wake up. Seeing them both awake, the holy study researcher, said that they were lucky. Professor Glast told them not to use them as experiments because they were valuable individuals. Hearing that, Ed casually asked, really? Said he was calmer than he thought. After all, while he was reviewing the research data, he would be keeping a close eye on them, so he warned them not to think of anything. Hearing that, Ed just sat there casually because he knew there was nothing he could do at the moment. While Isla herself was now feeling tremendous fear and anxiety, Ed's plan was simple. He just needed to wait, and Taylor would bring the subjugation group to cause a riot. The library that Taylor had passed must have collapsed by now. In this place that could not be touched, taking all the magic engineering formulas from various magic books would complete his mission. There was no activity, nothing to do, and nothing. The only thing that bothered him was how smooth this was until it made him a little uneasy, as well as the fact that made him a little helpless was, he had to be here with that girl. So he then tried to interact with her, but when Ed called her, Isla immediately screamed and warned him that if he moved one step, she would scream. She also threatened to bite her tongue. She said that she was very serious and not lying. Ed could only be dumbfounded to see that. He then said that he had no bad intentions towards her, if he intended to hurt her. There was no way he would miss this good opportunity, right? That seemed to calm Isla a little, seeing that, Ed also thought, if he had to feel from Taylor's point of view, of course he would think well of Isla, maybe, but Isla then said that he must be lying, because he was Ed. Hearing her disbelief, Ed then just told her to stop her nonsense, and sit down. He also said, if they waited, Taylor would definitely come. But Isla looked offended to hear Ed say Taylor. She said that he had no right to call him names like that. Hearing that, Ed just asked, why not? He also apologized for what happened during the entrance exam, but he had his own reasons, and he also helped during the Glaskin incident. Even though she didn't trust him, she could believe in Taylor. He would definitely come to save her. Isla really didn't expect to hear the word sorry come out of Ed's mouth. Ed could only sigh at that, but he was then surprised when he saw Mug heading towards him. Mug worriedly asked if he was okay. Was he hurt? Was there a scratch on his arm? Did he feel weak because of the magic reaction? Was his vision clear? Was there a problem with his sense of smell and hearing? Whether the tips of his arms and legs felt normal? Whether there was a sense of fatigue or tiredness? Whether he felt dizzy or his heartbeat was erratic? He followed his magic reaction here, but because his spirit level of consciousness was still medium, it took a little time to track him. Mug then apologized for not arriving sooner. Seeing Mug, who was so chatty, Ed then stroked his head and asked, where have you been? He also said that he found him well here. Isla was shocked when she saw Mug in Ed's hand. She asked if he could control spirits too. He was surprised because in the previous semester, his basic magic ability was poor. Hearing her question, Ed just said that it was none of her business. He was also thinking, finally there was someone sane to talk to, not caring about Ed's bitchy tone. Isla then said, if it was a spirit, he could send an emergency signal to the outside. They can send a request for help to a student or professor who can sense spirits. Hearing that, Ed just thought that he didn't need to add variables like that. Mug also told him that he didn't need to worry. Even though he couldn't guarantee his safety, he was trained in emergency obstacle reports more than anyone else. Ed was then confused to hear that. Mug explained, it took about half a day for him to get here, then avoiding being caught by the many researchers, golem guards, and monsters. It had been about 2 days since that day, but still clear in his mind. Miss Janika's furious expression at that time was really beautiful. Her goosebump-inducing anger was sincere. Not only that, the merchant box girl and the little witch girl wearing the witch hat who always visited the cabin said they wanted to cooperate. With all that, they were almost like a big army, so he told him not to worry. One way or another, the rescue rope would eventually come down here. He asked him to just calm down and wait here, but Mug couldn't help being amused when Ed suddenly stroked his ear, but instead of the happy expression he saw, Mug then trembled in fear when he saw Ed's bad expression. Isla was also confused why his expression was like that. Ed let out a short breath, then threw Mug far away. Ed then called the researcher who was watching his cell, and said that he changed his mind. He couldn't stay here. He had to get out. With a tone of urgency, he then told him to get him out of there right now. Hearing his request, the researcher only said, if he continued to make noise, the demon from the other side would wake up. Hearing that, Ed hurriedly said that this was a serious matter. If he didn't come out, they would all be in big trouble. The researcher certainly didn't believe that. He laughed at him, and thought, after peeling off the layers, he was just an ordinary student. And he then just left there. He also told Ed to shut his mouth. Isla was surprised at his sudden change of attitude. She then asked why he suddenly panicked. He said if they waited quietly, Taylor would come to save them. Ed did not answer and just sighed helplessly. With the key to the prison cell in his mouth, Muggs then returned to him. Muggs admitted that this was what he had ordered. Muggs did not know how he knew where the key was, but with his accurate instructions and actions, he managed to get it. He then handed the key to him and said, with this he can get out now. Ed could only be dumbfounded to see that this shithead even did something unnecessary without being told. Muggs seemed to mistake Ed's throwing annoyance earlier as his instructions, but with this, he managed to get out of the cell. But Isla was then shocked and confused, because when Ed came out, he then locked the cell again when only she was inside, and when Isla was about to ask him, Ed told her to shut up and only answer yes or no from now on. She was then confused to hear that. Ed then explained regarding his actions. Outside there were various kinds of research subject monsters and magic artifacts that had spirits, anyway dangerous. For now he told her to just follow his orders, and if they realized that he was missing, he told her to tell them that he ran away. That way, they wouldn't hurt her. After all, she couldn't even run around with her weakened legs. Isla was then surprised to hear Ed knowing that, but when she was about to ask, Ed asked her not to argue. With a sharp look in his eyes, Ed then asked whether she would obey him or not. Isla seemed to be a little scared when she saw that. She then nervously answered yes. Hearing that, Ed said that was good. He told her to stay calm and don't move. He would handle this, and he then stepped forward. Even though he had read the strategy guide, unexpected new things certainly could not be prevented. If it's a small variable, he can still handle it a little, because his stat has increased significantly. So most of the obstacles can be overcome by using the information he already knows, but of course, there are variables that he can't handle by himself. Even if Janica and Lortel join this riot, he seems to be able to handle it. But, when he heard Muggs say that Lucy also came, Ed thought, even with hundreds of hours of effort, even the most intentional players couldn't find a way to deal with that invincible enemy. Bad ending 27, Slothful Lucy. It's an event that won't happen unless we accidentally, so he didn't pay much attention to it. A bad ending that is sure to happen if the conditions are met. In the strategy guide it is written, if the conditions are met, Slothful Lucy will appear in an aggressive state. This guarantees a bad ending, so be sure to avoid it. The initial conditions of the event are: after the incident, Professor Glass crossed paths with Lucy Merrill. After remembering that, Ed then determined that he had to stop Lucy from coming here at all costs.